When I was a teenager, I was extremely self-conscious. I went to an all-girls school. I was in an all-girls boarding school. So, you didn't get the chance to meet guys. And I grew up with Disney princesses and Prince Charmings and Happily Ever Afters, and Titanic kind of ruined me in terms of romance. But when you're in an all-girls boarding school, it's kind of hard to find a guy. Myself and my friends, we would always kind of talk about Angel from Buffy, or there were all of these different guys. And then you had the town girls who weren't in the boarding school, who would be hanging out with the CBS lads, so they got the opportunities to meet these guys. But if we were caught down by the car park at the swimming pool, we were going to be killed by Miss Cook, who ran the boarding school. So we decided to try out the online thing. So this is long before people had, everyone had mobile phones. And so, chat rooms were the place to go to talk to people. So whenever our computer teacher wasn't looking, we'd log on to the chat rooms. I can't even remember what they were called now, but there were several of them with different rooms and this kind of thing, which, still exists today, but generally it's probably much seedier, I guess, or the same amount of seedy. I'm not too sure. So anyway, one of the days, a friend of mine, she got talking to a guy whose username was CJ, and she really liked him. He was a year older than us. He was from Donegal. He was funny. He was into cliff diving. Oh my God, he used to drink, and we were like 14, 15 thinking, wow, alcohol. So this was just, he was purely exotic and mature compared to us. So Anya, of course, asked for his number. He had a mobile phone. All we had was a payphone in the boarding school, where we would all kind of we'd gather our 20 cents, 20 pence at the time, actually, to call him. And we'd all huddle around while she was talking to him on the phone. We'd be hearing one side of the conversation. Every now and then, one of us would get to hear his Donegal accent. And of course, we were all swoon. So she talked to him for a while, and then my father got me a mobile phone. I was one of the first. Oh my God, it was a 3210, and it was one of the greatest things I've ever had in my whole life, and it had Snake, and I miss Snake so much now. But yeah, so she started to use my phone. Of course, she would buy credit so she could talk to him, and that was fine. But after a while, she got bored because, it was the online thing, and she was kind of thinking, well, we're never going to meet up. So another friend of ours said, I'll take him on. I'd like to talk to a boy for a while, because this is how it happens, apparently. And so she talked to him for a while. And of course, I was feeling a bit left out because everyone was using my phone. I was that friend. So he gave her the phone number for a friend of his to give to me. So, I started texting this friend, and he seemed really nice. We were getting on for ages, and then suddenly I got a message from the friend's girlfriend who I didn't know existed, and said was going to kill me if I kept texting her boyfriend. This is all just filler. It's all small little things. But anyway, so my friend who was texting CJ, like my original friend, she got bored, and I started texting him. And this is where it all began, I guess. Very quickly, he became my best friend. I told him everything. I told him about any fights I'd had with my brothers. I told him about my dad moving back to Ireland and how it was weird finally living with my dad because I grew up with my grandparents. So suddenly I had this strict personality right there. I told him about how I hated how I looked. I told him about all my worries. Absolutely everything that you could tell a person. I actually stopped writing in my diary for most of that time because he was my diary. He was who I talked to. He had girlfriends during this time. I had boyfriends, and I remember the day my first boyfriend broke up with me, and I had texted him, and he rang me when he got in from work at like 12 o'clock at night. And he was living with his grandparents and his mom, but he snuck down to use the house phone, and I snuck up the hallway to use the house phone, and we were on the phone for 4 hours. And I think at that point we'd actually been talking for about a year, just over a year. You know, I cried to him about how much it hurt, even though looking back, I was with that guy for 3 months. So really, how serious was it? But, you know, at that time, it's all consuming. It's like the end of the world. But he was there for me. And as we were finishing the phone call, he told me he loved me. And we had never met. But yet we talked every single day. I knew everything about him. He knew everything about me. And yeah, it felt like love. And we used to say it to each other all the time. Even though, you know, as I say, he would have girlfriends and I would have boyfriends, and we would share about that and we'd talk about it. It was one of those friendships that stays with you. One of those powerful ones that changes a little bit of who you are, especially when you're a teenager. Like, it's still like your formative years, you're still learning. You're learning all your life, but as a teenager, when it feels like everything else is against you, it feels great to have that person who's with you. We were speaking for 2 years, as I say, nearly every single day. We'd spend, I can't even remember how much money I spent on credit, but because he lived in Donegal and I lived in Tipperary, you know, meeting up wasn't very easy. And then especially when my father had moved back to live with us and he decided to lay down the law, you know, I wasn't able to go anywhere. But eventually my dad kind of came around and we had decided that we were going to meet halfway. We were both going to go to Dublin and we were going to meet for the first time. Like, we had seen pictures of each other. You know, he'd sent me his Deb's photos. He'd sent me pictures of him cliff diving. I'd sent him some really dodgy photo booth photos that I kind of hope don't exist anymore. I was so excited. It was in April we were meant to meet. And on the Saturday night, I'd gone to bed and suddenly I got this phone call saying, call me back. And I think I had 20-cent credit. So I said, okay. So I rang him for whatever amount of time the 20 cents lasted. We talked. The next thing I got a message going, thanks for calling, babes. Love you. We'll call you tomorrow. XOXO. And it's kind of pathetic that I still remember that, but I do. And I can still see it. And the next day, he didn't call. And I was like, oh, that's fine, you know, because, you know, you're trying to be cool. You're not like needy or anything. And sure, we were going to meet up the next week anyway. But the Monday came and I didn't hear anything. And I was still, okay, no, that's fine. Tuesday, that's a bit weird. Wednesday, paranoia. Thursday, I was like pestering my friends about what I should do or whatever. And on the Friday, I thought, you know what? Okay, fine. We're meant to meet up on the Saturday. Maybe he's met someone. Maybe, you know, that's fine. I just need to know. Maybe he was stringing me along. Like, also fine. I can deal with that. You know, you hurt for a while, but then lesson learned, you move on. And I remember, so I grew up on a farm, and I remember going down, like my grandpa had retired, so we didn't have any animals or anything, and we had a really gross defunct slurry pit that's not relevant to this story at all, but I can see it right now. And I was sitting on this trailer and I dialed his number and it rang a couple of times, and then this girl answered and I thought, oh, hello. And she said hello. I said, can I talk to CJ? And she made this noise where I thought she was laughing. I was like, oh, what? Hello? And she goes, CJ died last Sunday. And she made that noise again. And I said, well, why are you laughing then? Because I just thought it was a girl. I just thought it was a girl who, you know, he was seeing, picked up the phone. And, you know, as I say, you can deal with that. But it actually turned out it was his sister. And I had really upset her. So I remember running into the house. And my dad was actually nice to me about it, even though he wouldn't have... Actually nice, that sounds really horrible, but he'd be, you know, that real stiff upper lip Irish guy, and, you know, his whole thought was like, you know, you hadn't met the guy. But he had died. And I just cried. I cried. I couldn't think about anything else other than like, how has this happened? Like, what happened? Oh my God. So the next day I called back and the girl answered the phone and I just asked what had happened. And so I mentioned that he liked cliff diving, and what had happened was when he'd gone cliff diving with his friends, he jumped and got caught between two rocks and drowned. And I had known he was going to go cliff diving that day, but he used to do a lot, so I didn't think anything of it. But it's one of the pictures he'd sent me was him cliff diving, which is one that I actually don't look at. I still can't look at to this day. I found it the one he'd sent me of his Debs, and then I felt like, oh, I'm 34 now. I probably shouldn't be creeping on this 18-year-old. But yeah, it was I got grieved. And some people might not understand that, because I suppose some people can use the internet or hide behind phones and be whoever they want to seem to be. But, it was 2 years and you'd have to be a pretty good actor to go along with that. And I still, like, I'll never forget him because we never met. He'll always be perfect. There's no flaws or anything. And there's a tiny part of me that's still that teenage me that thinks, well, that's my happily ever after gone. And I still, like, it even surpassed Titanic in terms of setting up romance expectations for me, because this is just tragic, and it's hard. Because I think if you kind of really think about it and you look back on your life and all the times, like, when you were ever really in love, and I think that was probably the closest for me anyway. No offense to my exes. It was a different kind of love with you guys. It's still very much a huge part of me, even all of these years on, because I was 17 when that happened. And as I said, I'm 34 now and I still think about him. Anytime I'm near the sea, like genuinely, anytime I'm near the sea, I just, I don't know, my mind goes straight back, even though I didn't even see those cliffs. I didn't even see him jump ever, apart from the photo. And I just think about that. And I wonder what it could have been like. And I suppose if you're looking in the grand scheme of things, of people who have helped you become who you are and shape certain ideas you have and perceptions and expectations, yeah, he would be a key one. And I could be sad. I could be sad about it. But over time I've learned not to be sad about it, because even if I never settled down or anything, I knew what it was like to be in love. Whether people want to believe it or not, for me, that was it. And I had a love story.